Welcome to the Edgeworth Echoes podcast, discovering Edgeworthstown, a hidden gem of Irish history.
Welcome to another edition of the Edgeworth Echoes podcast. This is your host, John. On December the 16th, 2010, at an auction in Sotheby's, a book was sold for £79,250 sterling. That book was a copy of Emma by Jane Austen, signed by Maria Edgeworth, and the only known copy given by Austen to a fellow writer. Austen and Edgeworth lived at roughly the same time period, and both were authors. One was famous across Europe while she was alive, the other grew famous after her death. This episode will look at the connections between Maria and Jane, and also between Maria and one of the more colourful figures of the 19th century literature, George Gordon Byron, Lord Byron. Our story begins on the 17th of May 1813 at the home of Sir Humphrey Davy, a chemist and a friend of Richard Lovell Edgeworth. This was where Lord Byron met Richard Lovell Edgeworth and his daughter Maria. Byron wrote about the meeting in his diary, commenting on the impression both Edgeworths had made upon him.
Miss Edgeworth is a nice little unassuming Jenny Deans-looking body, as we Scots say, and if not handsome, certainly not ill-looking. Her conversation was as quiet as herself. No one would have guessed she could write her name. Her father, despite his clarity, elderly red complexion, is a fine old fellow, intelligent, vehement and full of life.
While Byron was apparently quite impressed with the volume of Maria's writings, Maria seemed less impressed with him, as she wrote in a letter to Sophie Ruxton.
Of Lord Byron I can tell you only that his appearance is nothing that you would remark.
Despite this unflattering description of Byron, Maria was a fan of his poetry. Though they did not meet again, her connection with Byron was not totally broken, as she had mentioned in Byron's poem Don Juan, published in 1823.
In short, she was a walking calculation, Miss Edgeworth's novels stepping from their covers, or Mrs. Trimmer's books on education, or Coeleb's wife set out in quest of lovers, morality's prim personification, in which not envy's self a flaw discovers. To others' share let female errors fall, for she had not even one, the worst of all.
Byron's life was dogged by scandals, and he left England because of these. In 1823 he raised a regiment of soldiers to help the Greeks in their fight for independence from Turkish rule. While there he contracted a fever and passed away in 1824. Maria's nephew, Henry Beddoes, told Maria about the final days of the poet's life, and she wrote about it in a letter to her aunt.
My nephew Henry Beddoes told us that Lord Byron was extremely beloved and highly thought of by all whom he heard speak of him at Missolonghi, both Greeks and his own countrymen. He had raised a regiment at his own expense. He had regained public esteem by his latter conduct. The place in which he died was not the worst inn's worst room, but an absolute hovel, without any bed of any kind. He was lying on a sack. The English officers all went away after his death, and the Greeks went into mourning.
Byron was also the father of Ada Lovelace, who worked with Charles Babbage on his early computers, wrote the first algorithm for computers, and is honoured for this on Ada Lovelace Day. In a letter to her aunt in 1816, Maria Edgeworth related how grateful she was to receive a copy of a new novel from the author of Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen. That novel was Emma, and, as I said at the beginning of this episode, it sold for a large sum of money in 2010. Edgeworth was probably flattered by the kind gift. It was, after all, the only copy of Emma to be presented by Austen to another author. However, Maria was not impressed by the novel, and she wrote about it to her brother Charles, criticising the plot.
There is no story in it, except that Miss Emma found that the man whom she designed for Harriet's lover was an admirer of her own, and he was affronted at being refused by Emma.
Jane Austen was born in 1775 at Steventon Rectory in Hampshire. Her earliest writings date from her teenage years, beginning with Love and Friendship in 1790. She became a fan of Maria Edgeworth's books, who was arguably the most important novelist writing in English during the early Regency period. In Northanger Abbey, published in 1818, she praised Edgeworth's novel Belinda, published in 1801.
Belinda is a work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humour are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language.
In 1795, a young lawyer called Tom Lefroy, visiting his relatives in Hampshire, met Jane Austen. He danced and flirted with Jane, and his wit and charm led to speculation about her romantic involvement. In 1796, Jane wrote letters to her sister Cassandra about her relationship with her Irish friend and how it was drawing to an end.
You scold me so much in the nice long letter which I have this moment received from you that I am almost afraid to tell you how my Irish friend and I behaved. Imagine to yourself everything most profligate and shocking in the way of dancing and sitting down together. I can expose myself, however, only once more, because he leaves the country soon after next Friday, on which day we are to have a dance at Ashe. He is a very gentlemanlike, good-looking, pleasant young man, I assure you. At length, the day has come on which I am to flirt my last with Tom Lefroy, and when you receive this it will be over. My tears flow as I write at the melancholy idea.
It has been suggested that the couple were deliberately kept apart because they were not practically suited, principally as both were poor and needed to marry into money. And, while Jane Austen ultimately never married, Tom Lefroy did get married in 1799. In 1833, Lefroy purchased Carryglass Manor, not far from Longford, and the Lefroys and Edgeworths became acquainted. Tom Lefroy later went on to become the Chief Justice of Ireland in 1852. Jane Austen had a niece, Anna, who was aspiring to be a writer with Jane's encouragement. She recommended Maria's books to her for inspiration. In a letter to Anne in 1814, she wrote her opinion of writers she liked.
I have made up my mind to like no novels really, but Miss Edgeworth's, yours and my own.
Jane Austen passed away in 1817, aged 41. It was only then that she was listed as the author of the books she had written. In the years after her death, Jane's fame steadily grew, and Maria would recommend her books to her younger siblings. Maria's own fame steadily diminished, but she would remain well enough known to raise funds for famine relief with her last book, Orlandino. So this brings us to the end of this episode, looking back at 3 key writers of the 19th century. As always, please like and share and subscribe to get more episodes. Until the next time. If you are interested in learning more about the Society and the history they preserve, please visit www.mariaedgeworthcentre.com. You can sign up to our newsletter, book tours, learn about our annual literary festival, and read up on some of the remarkable people who have links to our town.
This has been the Edgeworth Echoes podcast, rediscovering history.